Hello viewers, and welcome to another tutorial where today we're going to be building a cute little portfolio for your first HTML CSS portfolio, maybe some JavaScript, to display some of your projects so you can start sending them to employers to put your best foot forward and show everyone how cool you are. So here's a demo of what we're going to be building. We've just got some nice little background effects with icons and whatnot, and they hover. We've got our projects, so these can just be whatever you want, custom images, stuff like that, and we've just got some text about you, and then if we scroll down we've got links to your major platforms where they can check out your GitHub, LinkedIn, or CodePen, or Twitter, or whatever you want that you feel like you can put your best foot forward. And the idea is that, obviously you click on these links, they take you to your social media platforms. If you click on the projects, they will redirect you to the actual project that, hopefully you'll have hosted or whatever, or a link to where they can download it. So for this video, the prerequisite is that you've kind of done Free Code Camp's HTML and CSS certificate and the JavaScript certificate. It's going to be pretty simple, so if you're not feeling that comfortable, that's great, but as long as you're a little bit familiar, it should be sweet as. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I'll just close that. Hello. So we're going to start off by going into a directory from your terminal. So I just use my Mac terminal for this, so I'm going to cd into documents, cd, and I'm going to make a directory, make a folder called, why don't I just call it YouTube Tutorials. Nice, cd into YouTube Tutorials, and then I'm going to make a folder, make a file called index.html. Now, if this is something that you can enable from your VS Code, I use VS Code, but if I just type code dot, that will open up Visual Studio Code for me, and I will have this file here. Now, yes, that should be fine. So from here, what we're going to do is open up this file, and in here we're going to type in an exclamation mark, and it should autofill the basic formatting for an HTML document. So that's all good. Now we have that. We're going to save it. For this tutorial, what we're going to need is an extension called Live Server. So if you go here, I already have it installed, but essentially what it means is that when you come on this file, you can click Open with Live Server, and it will open up a blank document that has, exactly, it's just a blank document that's got your website. So let's put that there, and we'll put our code over here, and now we're ready to dive into it. So in this tutorial, there's a couple of things that you can do. We're going to do everything in one document just because it's concise and easy, but essentially when you do this kind of stuff, you can have an external JavaScript file. So you could make a file called index.js, and you could make a file called styles.css and import them both into this project. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to do it all in one because I like it and it's nice and easy. So I'll just delete them. And instead what I'm going to do is at the bottom of the body, I'm going to open up a script tag. And so this is where I'm going to have all my JavaScript. And up in my head, I'm going to have my style tag. And so that's where I put all my styles. So the first thing we're going to do for this tutorial is start off by changing the title. So let's change it to James Portfolio. So if I save that, that updates that top section, which is super cool. And now we're going to start off by filling out all the HTML. We'll work on the fancy colors and the moving stuff later because that's a bit of JavaScript. The second thing to note is when you do designs, this is just a good thing to remember. If you're wanting a responsive website, it's always good to do the mobile site first. So just by having a smaller screen, it's actually a great way to start off because we can just design for the smaller screen, and then anything bigger we can allow for that later. And it just means that your website will always be responsive. So when users make it on a small window, it's not going to overflow or anything. But without further ado, let's dive into it. So the first thing we're going to do is open up a div, and we're going to give it an ID of app. And this div is going to contain our whole application. So let's open it, and then in here we're going to have a main. So main, I guess just another little piece of background. Essentially, body, main, div, span, all these things are just containers for information. And so main is just another div, but it just is a nice way to signify that this is going to be the main content. So in here I'm going to have a header, and I'm going to give this an ID of about me. And, for the minute, let's just have an H1 tag. That's James MacArthur. And also just above this, I'm going to open up a div and give it the class of rotation. And this is just going to be an ID of background. This is going to be completely empty because this is what our JavaScript will later fill out for us. But yeah, so now we're down in here. In the header, we're going to add another p tag. And I've pre-prepared some text for this, so I'm just going to copy it in here, and it basically just says, I'm a self-taught developer with a passion for creating new and innovative web applications in digital spaces. So it's nothing, crazy, it's just a little intro. Cool, and now we can see in our live server that was all showing up. And you'll notice, once again, totally responsive to the page, so that's good. Off to a good start. Now, below our header, let's enter a few lines. We're going to have a section. So once again, this is just another div, but it kind of sections out content. And in here, we're going to have, we're going to give this an ID of projects. And this is going to be rendered using JavaScript later, but you'll see how that works too. And then at the bottom, we're going to have a footer. And in here we're going to have an unordered list, and the list items are going to contain anchor tags, and the anchor tags are going to have our links to our social media. And so in each of these anchor tags, what you have to do is you have to put in the href. And so in here I'm just going to put a hashtag, but what you would do is put in the actual link to your social media. And the second thing you want to do is target equals underscore blank, and that's just going to ensure that the link, when they click it, opens up in a separate tab, and so they don't get directed away from your portfolio. So we're going to do that, and for the second I'll just have this one saying LinkedIn, and then I'm just going to copy this list item down twice. This one can be CodePen, and this one can be GitHub. Sure. So now they should show up down there, and if we were to click on them, if I had to put the links in, they would redirect us away. But you can see how the opening up the new page works, and that's just because I have the target equals blank. If I remove it, it wouldn't do that. Cool. So that's actually the skeleton for our HTML, which is nice, pretty simple, nothing crazy. The next thing we're actually going to do is start filling out the script items. And so this is where we're going to dynamically render some of our HTML content. And this is where React is great, but since this is just a beginner portfolio, it's good to know how to kind of interact with what they call the DOM, and that's just the document object model. So we're going to start off by saying const projects div is equal to document dot query selector, and we're going to select it by projects. So this little hash denotes that the selector is ID, and so it's going to select this section here. And what we're going to do is just write some JavaScript that contains our project. So I'm going to make it an array, and I'm going to have it as an array of objects. And so once again, I pre-prepared this text, but essentially each object is just going to have an image link, So you can change that to be whatever you want as long as it's online. I mean, you can actually host it too, but I'm just using online images. A name, a description, an array of technologies that get used, and a link. And so that's a link to where the project is live hosted. And I would recommend that you do actually host most of your projects. And I have another video talking about that you can check out on my channel. And so now that we have all of our projects, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make another constant, and we're going to call it new inner HTML. And essentially how this is going to work is we're going to take that projects div, the section, and we're going to give it inner HTML. We're going to give it a package and just say, okay, this is all the HTML to render inside. And the reason we're doing this is because I'm only going to write the HTML out once, and it's going to dynamically load all of these things in, so that I don't have to copy and paste it and change it all. And so for this, what I'm going to do is use a reduce function. So projects.reduce, and this takes an accumulator and the individual project, and I mean, and an index if you want, but we don't need the index. And it's an anonymous function. And you also have to pass it its default, so it's starting accumulator. So the accumulator is what you accumulate to every time that you run through, you map over your particular thing. And in here, what we're going to return is the accumulator, which is initially just going to be the empty string, and we're going to add onto it, and we're going to use the backticks because it's going to be dynamic content. We're going to have an anchor tag, because remember, if they click on the project, it has to take them to the actual project. So, and it's going to have an href as equal to double quotations, and then we're going to put in project.link. So that will automatically input that link here. Then we're going to close the anchor tag and enter that. And then inside that, we're going to have a div, and that's going to have class equal to project card. And we haven't done these classes yet, but we will in a minute. And I'm going to close that div, enter that down. And inside here, we're going to start off by having the image tag. And so the src is going to be equal, the source is going to be, I've got one too many sets of brackets. The source is going to be project.image, and then the alt, which is just like the associated text, is going to be project.name. Close the image tag. We're going to have another division. And the reason we're having all these divs is because it will help us format all of the content. Using Flex to make sure that it's all laid out pretty. And in here we're going to have an h2 tag, and this is going to have our project.name, and then we're going to make these paragraph tags with the description. Cool, I should probably spell project right. And then finally, we're actually just going to have one more div, and this is going to have all of the technologies down there. Don't want that. Close that. Cool. Open that up, and in here we're going to render all of our technologies. And so that's going to actually be another reducer function. Project.technologies.reduce. And once again, it's going to have an accumulator, and it's going to have the technology. And this time, it's actually going to be the same. So it's going to default to a string, and we are just going to return ACC plus, once again, more backticks. And in here, it's going to be a div, and this div is going to contain a paragraph tag. And the reason we're surrounding it by a div is so that we can, make sure that it's separated properly and align it and everything, give it a container to sit in. And we're just going to map out the exact technology. So I know it looks terrible and I apologize for that, but this is going to render, or well, it's going to be the HTML that is going to repeat for each particular project that we have in this array. So you could add as many as you want and they will all map out in this particular format. So if I just save that, you'll notice that nothing happens, and that's because we're missing the very last step, where what we have to do is set the projects div dot inner HTML. So for that document object, the inner HTML is everything inside it, and we just have to set it to our new inner HTML. And so now if I save that and refresh this page, nothing is happening. And that is because I actually have the script in the wrong place. So what we're going to do is copy the script. The script comes just after the body. And that still didn't do it. So I'm just going to fix this and then continue. So looking at the console, I note that project is not defined. So what I'm going to do is just look for project. And here we have project, project, project. So why is project not defined? Looks like we have a capital P somewhere. That's exactly right. So that was it. Our issue is that we just had capital P's in there. And so now that we don't have the capital P, you'll notice that it's rendering out our thing. Our cursor is a pointer, so that is a link. It'll open us up to a new tab. And it repeats this code here out multiple times for every project that we add to that array. So now that that's all of our HTML, we have all the links and everything, what we're going to do is start styling it, because obviously it currently looks terrible. And to do that, we are going to start off with some secret little tips and tricks that I have. So the first one is we're going to go to Google Fonts, and essentially what we're going to do is just pick a couple of fonts. And so in this particular case, I already have them selected. And so I'm just going to, if you click on one, you click select this style, what will happen is you will get a, select this style. And then you can copy them and it will give you a link for it. I already have that link. You're welcome to just copy it from my code. And so Google APIs, and it has all the fonts here. And so I'm going to save that and go back to my portfolio. And now that I have all my fonts, the second thing we're going to do is just apply some styling to the whole entire project. And so we're going to make box sizing a border box. And this just means that if we have any borders, they don't overflow or change the size of the particular divisions. And we're going to make padding 0 and margin 0. And so once again, that's just going to make everything sit a little bit tighter and remove any default margins or paddings. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to style our app. And so the selector for that is the hashtag if it's an ID. So we're going to get our div by ID, and we're going to give it a min height of 100 view height. And so that just means that it's always going to be at least the page height. We're also going to give it a position of relative, and you'll see why later. We're going to give it an overflow of hidden, and this is also for that background effect later. And we're going to give it a display of flex and flex direction column. So that's just going to mean that all the content, we're telling it, okay, let's use flexbox, and all of the content needs to be arranged in a column. So that's good. It didn't change anything. All of the content is still arranged in a column. You notice if I were to get rid of this and save it, it tries to display it slightly differently. So we definitely need that text there. Now that we have that, what we're going to do is just target our main, and we're just going to give it one simple command and say flex 1. And so what this means is that if I comment out this line real quick, it should theoretically just mean that the main is going to take the entire page, but it hasn't done this in this particular second, and we will find out why soon. But let's just anyway come back to it, put that in, And the next thing we're going to do is start styling our sections. So let's come down here. The first one we're going to do is we're going to target our About Me section. And so for that, it's going to be position relative, Z index 20. You'll see why later. Once again, it's going to be for the background. We're going to give it a color of white. So that's going to make all the text go away for the second. Nice. We're going to give it a text align center. So all the text will be centered. And once again, you'll see that if I comment that out. We're going to go, background is going to be HSLA 0, 0, 0, and 0.3. I think these need to be percentages. Cool, so that just makes the background slightly darker, and once again that's just for when it sits against our background effect. And we're also going to give it a max width of 800 pixels. So it's just not going to allow it to go crazy wide. So if I open this fully up, you can see where it stops. I'll close that down again. And we're also going to give it a margin. So we're going to go 40 pixels on the top. For the left, it's going to be auto. For the bottom, it's going to be 0. And for the right, it's going to be auto. And what that's going to do is just mean that when we have our max width, if we go on a big page, the side margins are just automatically generated so that the content is centered, which is just nice. Cool, so that's that. The next thing we're going to style is the About Me header, so H1. So what we actually need to do is have a sub-selector. So what you do is when you have your original selector, if you just add the next subsequent selector there, it will target anything that's inside that primary one. So this will only target H1 elements inside the About Me div. And so for this I'm going to have font family. And this is one of the fonts that I have downloaded, 2P, and we're going to give it a backup of cursive. So that's super cool. We're going to go way bigger, font size 2 rem, and we're going to go padding top 10 pixels. Nice. And after this, we're just going to add in a media query. So this is a responsive effect, meaning that it applies different styles depending on whether or not the condition is filled. And so we're going to give the condition min width 500 pixels. So that means if the page is a minimum width of 500 pixels, apply the following. So we're going to overwrite the above style. So you want to make sure it has it above because it reads it down. We're just going to go font size 3 rem. And so that just means when the page is bigger, I mean, in this case, this is 500 pixels, so you'd only see it if you really went into the mobile view, which you can do by clicking that. The font size has gone down to 2 rem, and then it's gone up to 3 rem there, so that's cool. But anyway, let us continue. And also, when we're on a bigger screen, so we're just going to add a padding of 14 pixels. So it's just going to add it everywhere. Push everything in a bit. So there's a tiny border around that, which once again we can see if we just inspect it. Make that smaller. You can see that green border around the outside. That's the 14 pixels. Cool. So that's our little header. After that, we're going to move on to the paragraph text. So once again, I could just target the paragraph text, but I like being ever so slightly more specific and just going About Me paragraph. I could also add classes to each paragraph specifically, but I like this style. It depends whatever works for you. And so I'm going to give it a font family of Poppins and a backup of sans serif. I'm going to give it a padding top of 20 pixels and a text align justify. And so that's looking a bit tidier. On to the next thing. I'm just going to actually add something to the About Me H1. I'm just going to add a padding bottom of 10 pixels too. Just going to push it down a little further. And here we're actually ready to start styling the projects now. So if we come down, all this stuff currently looks terrible, so I think it probably needs a little bit of work. So for projects, we want that section that contains all of our projects to scroll, if you remember in the initial demonstration. So the first thing we're going to do is make the maximum height 100%, so no overflowing, and we're also going to just say overflow auto, and so that just means that if it does overflow, it's going to scroll. So it's going to be a scroll window inside of our massive scroll window. We're also going to say start styling the links. So projects A, we're going to go text decoration none, because currently all of these links look, this text look like links. So that's just going to get rid of the underline. And that is that. And then the next one we need is to start styling the project card, which is just here. So for that, we're going to do dot project card. So just like the hash targets an ID, and the A targets a particular element, the dot targets a class. And so here we're going to give that a max width of 800 pixels. We're going to give it a margin of 20 pixels auto, a box shadow. We're going to inset the box shadow. So a box shadow is just like a shadow, but if you type inset at the start, it just makes it come inwards instead of outwards. And that just means that when it sits up against the side, it won't overflow, it'll always be visible. And we're going to go 0, 0, 3 pixels, 1 pixel cyan. And then we're going to give it a background of HSLA 0%, 0%, and 0.3. Ooh, that should actually be a project card. Yeah, and so now we can see that box shadow coming in. We're going to give it a position relative, you'll see why later, a Z index 20. That's actually a good explanation. So you need a position of relative for an Z index to actually work. We're going to go color white, makes all the text go white. I'm actually going to bring that back in too. And we're going to display flex, and we're going to go font family Poppins once again, back up sans serif. Nice, so that still looks like trash. In fact, it's all gone. Where did it all go? Oh, that's because it's all white. Display flex. Oh, that's right. So it's currently displaying across the page. But anyway, we'll get back to that in just a second. So what we also have to do is style the image, because the image is currently just being ridiculous. So I'm going to go dot project card image, and I'm going to give it a display of none. So it's going to make it go away. So now we can actually see our things, which is good. We're going to go object fit fill, max width 200 pixels, so that's just not going to allow it to overflow. We're going to go height, which is going to be auto. Cool. So at least our things are starting to look alright, and we will come back and give it a display soon, but not just right this minute. Actually, even better idea, what we're going to do is, I think for smaller screens it will probably look better if we don't display the image, but on bigger screens we will. So we're going to use another media query, and this time we're going to go min width 600 pixels. And so if it's over 600 pixels, we'll let the image display. So we'll go project, we will just give it a margin top of 50 pixels, so that's just a little extra thing. We're going to go dot project card image display block. So what that's just going to mean is that on bigger screens the image is going to display, smaller screens it goes away and it sits tight, the content sits tight to the wall. So that's pretty cool. We're getting there, making some progress. Now after that we're just going to style some of the divs inside. So a div, we're going to give it a display of flex and a text transform uppercase. And so that's just changing. Flex naturally displays in a row. You know, if I were to add flex direction column, it would look exactly like it did just before, but we don't want that. We want it to display across. And it just makes everything uppercase. And so once again, if I were to come out, we can see how that displays across. And we're also just going to go project card div. So actually I made a mistake though. This is meant to be div. And so that's going to target a div within a div within side project card, and this one is just going to have some padding of 8 pixels. So it's just going to bring everything in a bit. That looks way better. There you go. And then if we come out, the images display. Cool. So lastly, we're going to go for the paragraph text within the div within the project card. We're going to give it a margin of 0 and 10 pixels. It's just going to spread everything out a little bit. We're going to go color. Oop, that's not right. Color is going to be white. Padding of 1 pixel and font size 0.7 EM. Cool, so that's just going to make them a little bit smaller, just so they don't dominate everything. And now that that's done, the last thing we have to style is the footer. So we're just going to go footer. We're going to go margin 0. So that's, if you give it 4 inputs, it does top, right, bottom, left. If you give it 2 inputs, it just does top, vertical and horizontal. So that's going to be vertical margin of 0, horizontal margin either side of auto. And we're also just going to go footer UL. So this is going to target the unordered list within the footer, and we're going to go display flex. We're going to go next. We're going to target within the footer UL individual list items. We're going to give them a list style of none, so that's going to remove the bullet point. You can see that's gone. We're going to go position relative. Oh, come back. There you go. We're going to go Z index 20, color white, white, and margin of 0 and 10 pixels. Nice. Okay, cool. Excellent. Why is that not centered? That's odd. Footer, margin 0 auto. UL display flex. I mean, what we can actually do is let's just try grid. Another display system. We're going to go place items center. But that does that. Okay, so we're going to go back to flex. We're going to go. So there's a lot of ways you can center things. In this case, we're just going to go justify content center. There you go. That does the trick. Cool. So now we have all of our content. We've got our website. Looks decent. I might actually just add a tiny bit of. Actually, no. Everything else will come back later. The next thing we have to do is we have to actually use the icons. So for the icons, what you want to do is type in font awesome 6.0 icons, and you can come and select whatever ones you actually want, what was it? Font awesome. You want it the CDN. The CDN is just going to, without having to install anything, it's just going to let you join it. And so you just want to copy the link tag, and we're going to just come up here and put that in just there, that link tag. And that's just going to allow us to use font awesome icons in our particular thing. And it should be the 6.0 beta. So I might use an ever so slightly different one, but you can just copy it from my code. Cool. And so then what you can do is you can just go font awesome 6.0 icons, and you can just pick any of these icons from here. If you want, I would just select by free, and so you can just pick and choose, and I've already picked and chosen a bunch. So you click on them, you just copy the icon pack, and I mean, I guess a great place to start is probably like, let's just look up LinkedIn. So if we just copy that, and instead of all of our footers, what I'm going to do is just change it from the text that we currently have to the icons. So, you know, for example, for GitHub, I'm going to put GitHub in the first one. For the second one, I'm going to have my LinkedIn. And then lastly, I'm going to have my code pen. If I just save that, it just means that down the bottom we're going to have our cute little icons. For the rest of them, though, what we're going to need to do is do some more processing. And so this is all for the background. So what we're going to do is just define a constant number. And this is just going to be how many times we repeat our icon packages, our display of them. Because we're going to have to fill up our entire screen with all of these icons. And you need, you know, thousands of them, which we don't want. So we can just get JavaScript to repeat a bunch of them. The next thing we're going to do is get our background element. So that's going to be document.get element by ID. Now, notice you can select things using query selector and select by whatever, or you could do query selector all to get multiple. This is just another selector method where you don't actually have to pass in the hash or the dot. And so you could do get element by ID, you could get it by class, whatever you like. And the next thing we're just going to do, bg icons is equal to an empty string. And I'm just going to go for let I equal 0, I is less than number I plus plus. I'm just going to loop over and plus equals, so it's going to add to whatever bg already is the following content. So it starts off as an empty string, and it's going to be a div. And then inside here, I'm going to paste a whole bunch of icons that I like. So in this particular case, I have about 50 icons, and I've repeated it twice. So there's 100 all up. So you'll notice we went from line 330 to 240. And I'm just going to save that. And then the very last thing we have to do is actually render it on the page. And so, but we won't do that inside the for loop, we'll do it afterwards. But, you know, for example, if I just went console.log bg icons, and then we inspect that, go to our console. Assignment, oh, looks like I'm assigning to a constant variable. Where am I doing that? Let bg icons. Yes, this should be bg icons. That's all good. And you can see that now it's just printing that out heaps, which is what we want. So that's all good. But yeah, now that it's generated all of that HTML, we just need to actually set it. So bg.innerHTML is going to be equal to our div of icons, so bg icons. Which is all here, which is cool. It obviously looks bad, but you know, at least it's displaying. So now that that's all there, the last thing we have to do to make this whole thing come together is just style it. And so we're going to come up to our styles, and I'm actually going to do it all at the top, just under main. And so I'm going to start off with my background. And the reason we add relative to our container is so that BG inside is positioned relative to it when I give it a position of absolute. Now, you can give it a top, left, bottom, and right to tell it where inside the parent container it is, or the nearest relative container, but you can also just do inset and say 0, for example. So you can see now it's sitting behind, but what I'm actually going to do is stick to the classic, because I want to make them different. So I'm going to go -80 view height, bottom. I fiddled a bit with these beforehand to make it work. I'm going to go left -60 VH. Oh, I'm actually going to use a percentage, and right -60%. And so that's just going to spread them out a little bit further. The next thing I'm going to do is for smaller screens, so I'm going to add in a media query, max width 600 pixels. So this is only going to apply on smaller screens. I'm just going to move the left over so it's -100 VH, and this just stops any funky, you know, see how it lines everything up nicely on a smaller screen, and then on a bigger screen it lines it all up a bit differently. But anyway, so now that we've done that, we can move on to the next step, which is just, so we filled up our BG element with a div full of icons. So we're just going to now target that. So we're going to BG div. We're going to give it a position of relative. We're going to go display flex, flex wrap, no wrap. So that's going to mean that if our horizontal line content runs over the page, it's not going to wrap itself onto the next line. It's just going to overflow. And this is where our overflow hidden is important, because it's just going to mean that our page doesn't scroll either side. It's just going to render off into the void. And then we're going to add in a Z index of 10. And this is just going to mean that it sits differently as well. Cool. And so there's all our icons up there. We also just have to write out some animations. So to do an animation, you write keyframes and you give it a name. So I'm going to give it an animate. And what you do is you give it at the start of the animation, I'm going to transform, I'm going to move everything, translate X by 25%. Then at 50%, I want to transform to the other side. So translate minus 25%. And then at 100%, I want it to go back to the start. So transform, translate X 25%. So that's just going to animate everything. And so if we go up here and write animation, animate, 80-second duration, linear, so it's constant speed, and infinite, so it repeats forever. That's just going to move it all back and forth. Cool. So there's that. The second thing we just want to add onto this is we need one more animation because we want the rows to go in opposite directions. So what that means is that we have to animate one going one way and one going the other way. So we're just going to write, we're going to copy this whole thing down. We're just going to call it animate 1 because we're boring, and we're just going to inverse these signs. So that's going to be 25, and this is going to be minus 25. Cool, but we haven't applied that to anything just yet, and this is here. So now what we have to do is just say, okay, hashtag background div, and we only want it on the second child. So for the nth child, we can select the second child, and we're just going to give it animation, animate 1, which is the second one, 120 seconds, linear, infinite. So that's actually just going to vary the speed up a little bit, which is just going to give it a slightly different effect. And we're going to give it an animation delay of negative 50 seconds. So it's just going to give it a weird start point, and we're also going to give this one, I should probably spell that right. We're going to give this one an animation delay of minus 40 seconds. Cool. That was a very important thing, because since we're having a whole lot of divs 50 times, we want it to be every second row. So you can see how every second row is moving at a different speed to the first row. Just putting 2 will only target the second child, which is currently sitting way up above, so we couldn't see it. 2n is every second one. 3n would be every third one. Cool, so now there's that. The next thing we have to start styling is the icons. So we're going to come down here, we're going to go icon, color, HSL, we're going to go 230, 100%, hue, saturation, and light, 12%, a little bit dark. We're going to go transition, all 1 second linear. So this is just for any transition effects we apply to it. They're all going to take 1 second. They're going to be constant speed. We're going to go font size 2.2 rem, nice and big. Padding 5 pixels, that'll spread them out a bit. We'll go user select none, so that they're just in the background, you can't select them. Same with cursor, we're going to go default, so that there's no random cursor effects. And last we're going to go put position relative. Nice. And now we're going to add some hover effects. So that's going to be so when it hovers, we're going to transition the transition time to 0 seconds, and that just means that when we apply the glow effect, it comes off. It applies immediately, and then it comes off at a speed of 1 second. Color FF6600. We need a hashtag in front instead of the hue, saturation, lighting. And then so like for example, if it's going to make them go orange. And then we're going to go filter, drop shadow. So this is a background effect. We're going to go 0.75 rem, same color, FF6600. And that just means that nothing for the second, apparently. That's right, you'll see why in a second. So after that, we're going to add a pseudo effect. And so these are either before or after, and basically if your parent is position relative, it's just like CSS creates an extra div that you can do whatever you want. For these, most of the time they're going to be position absolute, and you always have to do content nothing. They just require that parameter. You can write James if you want, and it will fill out with James's, but we're just going to have it as nothing. We're going to go inset 5 pixels, so that's going to sit in 5 pixels inside from the parent element. Border radius 50%. It's going to be perfectly round. Background crimson, sounds like a nice color. We're going to go filter blur 20 pixels. Yep. And then we're going to go opacity 0 and transition, same as the other one, opacity instead of all, 1 second linear. Can't see it effect, but you can see that the glow gradually fades away, but you'll see all the rest of the effects soon. There's one thing I'm just missing. Where is it? Filter position, background crimson. Okay, anyway, last thing we have to do is just add in hover. This varies the after effect if you've hovered on it. We're just going to go transition 0 seconds and opacity 0.7. Cool, so I know exactly what the last thing we're missing is. Essentially, we have this, where is it, all our styles, class rotation. We have to now apply the class of rotation, but you can see that the things are working in the background. that last thing we did just applied the glow. You can ever so slightly see it. But now we just have to make everything rotate. And I also just want to add something here. There should be cursor pointer. So that just means that when we hover over these, make that important. Random. We can come back to that in a sec. I know what will be the problem. There's actually one more thing we need to add just down here real quick. Now that we have the icons in, list icon, let's just make them a bit bigger. So font size 1.4, EM color, that's not how you spell white, and cursor pointer. So you can't see them, but at least the cursor applies over them. So that's good. Anyway, back to rotation. So the last step is actually super simple. All we have to do at the very end is just go transform. We're going to give it a rotation. We're going to go minus 30 degrees. Nice, they will go differently. And then the last step is just to change the background. HSL, we're going to go 230, 90%, and 7%. Beautiful. And that, my friends, is our application. Done and done. You could host this on Netlify. As I mentioned, I have another video for it. Nice and responsive. If we check it out on mobile, looks good too. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Leave a like, comment if you want more, and check out my other videos if you want to land yourself your first developer job. I did it in 4 months from nothing, and I know that you guys can too. Catch you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.